Good morning. My name is Sarah, and I'll be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Voluntary Third-Party Audit Program conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there'll be a question-and-answer session. And if you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw that question, you may press the pound key. Thank you. I will now turn the conference over to Mr. Aaron Duke of API New Programs and Operations. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to thank everybody in advance for taking time out of their busy schedules to participate in today's webinar. As you are well aware, this webinar is part of a series of webinars and workshops that are being conducted by the industry PSMS team throughout 2018. And these are designed to educate the operator and stakeholders on the tools and programs that are being developed to help with the implementation of RP 1173 and the pipeline safety management systems. And just to let you know, kind of refresh everybody's memory, in January, the team held a webinar to introduce the industry developed maturity model and roadmap, and that was followed by the February webinar to talk through all the tools that are currently available, the implementation and other tools. And all of these webinars are available on the website at pipeline-sms.org. And all of them have been recorded, as well as this one will be recorded and are available on the website after the webinars are done. And now to today's webinar. This is the third webinar in the series, and it will focus on an introduction to the voluntary third-party audit program and process that's being developed by API. And we'll also be providing an update on the evaluation tool, as it is a key input to that program. Today's speakers are going to include Anne-Marie Kaiser from Marathon Pipeline and Bill Bird from RCP Inc. Both Anne-Marie and Bill are active members of the industry implementation team and are key contributors to the development of the documents, tools, and other resources that are being put together by that team. Dave Merck, the pipeline manager at API, has been leading the SMS efforts from the API segment perspective. And my name is Aaron Duke, and I've been working with the implementation team on the audit from the audit program perspective and API program perspective to put together this third-party audit program. Dave will be introducing the webinar. Anne-Marie will be giving an update on the roadmap. Bill will be updating the group on the evaluation tool progress, and finally I'll be discussing the development of that audit program. To get to the agenda, today's focus is going to be on the development of this API voluntary third-party audit program. We're going to start things off with an introduction and refresh on the roadmap, tie together the tools in the audit program, and walk the operator through their SMS journey with the tools. As I stated earlier, the evaluation tool that's being developed is key to that third-party audit program. It's the key input, and an overview and update will be provided on that evaluation tool as well. At that point, we'll take a brief pause in the material to allow Q&A on the tools and roadmap before we get into talking about the audit program. The overview and development of the third-party audit program will form the bulk of the materials today, and this will include a review, of the audit process and the process that is being used to develop and qualify auditors. Finally, we'll provide an update on the upcoming SMS events and activities. And of course, before we start all of these, I need to take a break here and address the API antitrust statement and the requirements around the antitrust guidelines. So API's antitrust guidelines. It is API's policy to comply with the antitrust laws. API staff and member company representatives should observe the following guidance. You have no discussion or forecasting of prices for goods or services provided by or received by a company. There can be no sharing or discussing of any company's confidential or proprietary information. No discussion of any company's specific purchasing plans, merger divestment plans, production information, inventories, or costs. No sharing or discussion of specific company compliance costs unless those are publicly available. No agreement or discussion regarding the purchase or sale of goods or services. No discussion of how individual companies intend to respond to potential market economic scenarios or government action. Discussions can be limited to generalities. and no disparaging remarks regarding specific vendors, products, or services. Now, we'll do our best to control the discussion through the presentation of the webinar materials, but if a discussion does present an antitrust issue, be sure to raise your concern immediately. If the discussion continues, announce that you're leaving the meeting because you have an antitrust concern, and immediately report your concern to API's Office of the General Counsel and your company's own counsel. Okay, so now that I've finished that, I am going to pass it to Dave Merck for some opening comments.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. You really did a good job kind of kicking things off and opening it up. But let me just reiterate, appreciate everybody joining the call, the webinar this morning. These types of trainings in sharing of information on the latest developments of the team on tools and other resources for you, in our view is extremely important. And especially as we've expanded the team that has been focused on implementation to a broader full oil and gas transmission and distribution group, even more important that we make sure that we're getting all these tools out to the industry collectively. And so I think we have a good mix on the phone, and again, really appreciate everybody participating today. As Aaron mentioned, this is the third in a series of trainings that we're doing over the course of this year. In fact, we're adding an additional webinar in June, followed by a workshop in October. And again, the goal of these is to kind of just bring you along and give you an update and provide just a snapshot of how these tools can be used and used by all of you along the journey and following along the roadmap, which Anne-Marie will hit on here in a little bit. So today is really about I could say that third step, or that step in the process where you're starting to move into. We've talked to this point about the implementation, the planning, and then the implementation tools, and the gap analysis, and really this is moving into that phase of evaluation and assessment of the effectiveness of the program. And so what we're going to talk about today is the evaluation tool, and then move into an option that it's really an extension of that evaluation tool, a voluntary audit process and program that API is developing to support the industry. So we'll give you again a quick snapshot of that. And in the tool, the third-party audit tool is based on not reinventing the wheel. It's based on some work that API has done from an assessment audit standpoint in our downstream and upstream segments. And so it's kind of a collective use of some of the other programs that we're doing. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really to start that evaluation process, be able to track and benchmark where we are as an industry, where you all are as operators, and looking at your programs, again, along that maturity curve, and where you are within the implementation of SMS and strengthening of safety culture within your organizations. It's a tool, that's all. It's not obviously a mandatory tool, it's a voluntary tool. It's one option of many that you have. It's just something that we felt to support you all and give you another option to work through this. And it's, as we've said, and as 1173 really hits on, it's flexible and scalable. We realize there's operators of all sizes, shapes and forms. Operations vary greatly, and we wanted to make sure the tools that we've produced from the planning, implementation, evaluation, and this third-party audit tool are flexible and scalable, and can be used and meet your needs as operators in various segments of the industry. So that's really it. Just wanted to give you kind of just a general overview of what to expect today. As Aaron mentioned, Bill's going to talk evaluation tool. or Anne-Marie first on the roadmap, then Bill, and then Aaron, and then we'll close with some Q&A at the end as well before we wrap up. Before I pass it over to Anne-Marie to talk roadmap, I did want to mention, since I have a captive audience, I did want to mention we are about to roll out, hopefully by the end of today, we're going to have a new refreshed version of our website up and running. So pipelinesms.org is the website for those of you who have not been on that site. And we just saw the concept yesterday, kind of the final version, and it looks great. Where hopefully it's again another tool for you to use and to get access to all of the different things that we've developed for you to work through and on the implementation journey. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the revisions and the updates we've made to the website. And again, this is a collective effort across 6 trades to really develop a robust website that supports you really at any level you are along that maturity level. So that, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was we'll be putting out our annual report for performance from last year in Pipeline SMS, and we're going to be releasing that report before the Pipeline Conference, the API Pipeline Conference next week. So we anticipate that going out on Monday, and that report will be posted as well on the new website. So just a couple of things I wanted to highlight before we jump into the training. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'll talk long enough. Anne-Marie, so let me turn it over to Anne-Marie to talk you through quick the roadmap as a refresher from the last call we had.
All right, thank you, Dave. I'm Anne-Marie Kaiser with Marathon Petroleum, and I'm going to hit the roadmap at a very high level. When we provided our Pipeline SMS webinars in January and February of this year, we talked through the maturity model, and we also talked through the roadmap section as well. So just to continue to tie everything back and show you where the evaluation tool and third-party audit program that you'll hear about today fit, wanted to run through the roadmap. So you've got your getting started, you've got your planning tool, you've got your implementation tool, and then you've got your evaluation tool. So evaluation tool and third-party audit tools are good to use when you're in level 3, 4, or 5 of the maturity model. So level 3 is implemented, level 4 is sustaining, level 5 is improving. So once you've got your programs implemented, that's a good time to start through the evaluation tool as well as the voluntary third-party audit program. So that's just a quick update on the roadmap. It hasn't changed. It's out there on pipelinesms.org if you want to go take a look at it. But that's how the evaluation tool and the API third-party audit program fit into the maturity model. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill Bird to talk about the evaluation tool.
Sure, thanks, Anne-Marie. As Anne-Marie mentioned, there's 3 major tools that have been developed. So planning is helping you get started and develop your ideas, and then implementation tracks you through implementing whatever program you came up with. And then finally, the last tool was the evaluation tool. So if you go to that slide, we decided early on that there's really 2 things that at a high level we need to evaluate. And the first was effectiveness of implementation. So the question there is, how well have you implemented the RP in your organization? So we've got a whole set of questions around that. And then lastly, it's effectiveness of results. Because at the end of the day, you do a PSMS to get a certain result, which is a better safety performance for your company and hopefully for the industry overall. So in the final analysis, you could do the greatest job in the world on your PSMS, but it doesn't change the results of your risk profile or your incidents and accidents. Well, then you haven't really achieved your final objectives. So we've got 2 different things that we're evaluating. So how well did you implement, and then how big a difference did it make in the results of your organization? So this is intended to be an objective evaluation with quantitative results. So there's always a lot of judgment involved when you're doing these kinds of assessments, but still we try to provide enough structure so that you get a number out of this evaluation. And that number goes from 0 to 5, which is aligned with the maturity model that Anne-Marie discussed. So 1 means you're just you have your plan put together, but you haven't really developed anything yet, all the way through 5, which is you pretty much reached nirvana. And frankly, we don't expect companies to actually score a 5.0 for most of their evaluations. There's always something else that needs to be done, but that gives you the range of potential scoring. And those scores that you come up with out of this effectiveness tool are intended to be able to be used for benchmarking. So you can compare your score to some other similar company score and get a general idea of where the two of you stand on the scale from 0 to 5. Now, if you evaluate yourself and they evaluate themselves, you know, there's always going to be some differences in how you do those evaluations, but that's what the process that Aaron is going to discuss later, where you have the third-party audit process through API that makes sure everybody's getting evaluated exactly the same way. So nevertheless, the evaluation tool results are intended to be used for benchmarking, and more accurately, they can be used internally to track your improvement over time. So you can, after you've basically developed your programs, you can use the evaluation tool to see how well they're functioning, and then you can go back on a regular basis every year, every 2 years, you know, whatever you decide, and compare those scores and see how much improvement you've gotten over that period of time. So that's part of your check cycle in the plan, do, check, adjust, continuous improvement cycle. You can do it yourself. It's intended, it was designed as a self-administered tool, and it has its own set of guidance to help you understand how to use the tool and do it effectively. But it's also built where a third party can use it, and it is the basis, as I said earlier, of the third-party audit program that API is developing. So the user guidance explains the tool and also gives you some examples. It's not extensive guidance, but it's enough, hopefully, to get you started and hit about the right level of detail. So the next slide, Aaron. So I've mentioned that we're trying to evaluate two things: effectiveness of implementation and then effectiveness of results. So effectiveness of implementation, we have the implementation matrix, which has questions that address every element of the RP, and then those questions are linked to what we call the shall statements from the RP. So that was from a tool we used to call the conformance checklist, where if you go line by line through the RP and you pick out every time it says the operator shall or must do something, then we call that out as a separate requirement. There are 234 of those. So these questions in the implementation matrix are tied directly to individual shall statements. Some questions address a dozen shall statements. Some of them only address 1 or 2, but you can make a connection, and those shall statements are in the tool, so you can see exactly what they are. And the shall statements are basically verbatim out of the RP, so you can see exactly what the RP says on that topic. So the implementation matrix is scored on a level of 0 to 4, which ties to the maturity model. So if you are 4 on the maturity model, then your programs are sustaining. They've been developed, they're meeting the requirements of the RP, and they've been through continuous improvement cycles. So you're just continually getting better and better on the programs themselves. So it has 50 big, what I call big, broad questions. So this is obviously high level. You got 50 questions addressing 234 shall statements. So you can see that each question on average addresses about 5 shall statements. And the reason we went up to a pretty high level there is to make it more flexible and more scalable. You're going to ask the same 50 big questions for a public gas system that has a dozen employees as you will a multinational corporation that has 5,000 employees. So the operator and the auditor will need to agree on the methods they're going to use to get in the weeds for each organization. And that method is not going to be the same for a small operator as it is for a really big operator with lots of different operating functions, lots of different operating areas, maybe different operating divisions. So whatever method that is going to be specific to that company that helps them figure out at the end of the day, what's the answer to question number 6. And then that method needs to be used consistently over time as you do subsequent evaluations. So next slide, Aaron. The second thing we're trying to evaluate is effectiveness of results. And what we've done there is identify some key performance indicators. Unfortunately, they're all lagging key performance indicators because we wanted to make them publicly available data and the kinds of data that every operator will have. So we're not trying to create any new KPIs or KPIs that one company really likes but another company doesn't track at all. So we're kind of forced into lagging KPIs for this. And each one of those KPIs would be compared to your industry segment average for that KPI. So we've identified the 3 major industry segments. There's gas transmission, there's gas distribution, and there's liquid transmission. And the KPIs for each one of those industry segments hit the same idea, but they aren't measured in exactly the same way because they report different things to PHMSA. So the KPIs are very similar, but when you look at the details, the numbers that go into them are slightly different. But you compare your KPI, say, as a liquid transmission operator to the average of liquid transmission operators for that KPI. And if your KPIs are significantly better than the industry average, you get credit. On the other hand, if you're significantly worse, you get a deduction. And if you're within 25% of the industry average, you don't get a credit or deduction, you're just average. So there's no way to say that the PSMS is making you better than you used to be before because your performance is basically just average for that KPI. Now, one issue is that a lot of these metrics, there just aren't that many incidents in the industry on an annual basis. So a smaller operator that has, say, less than 500 miles of pipe might, on average, not have any incidents in a single year, but then they might have 2 incidents in the following year, and they're still just average. So they've had 2 incidents in 2 years. But to kind of level that out so they don't look perfect in one year and horrible in the next year, we're using multi-year averages that scale based off the size of the operator. So if you're less than 500 miles, use a 3-year average. 500 to 1,000 miles, use a 2-year average. More than 1,000 miles, you just use your annual average. And that puts everybody kind of on the same footing when they're comparing themselves to an industry average. And then we do have some automatic deductions for PHMSA reportable injuries and fatalities. Now, these are PHMSA reportable, not OSHA reportable. So if somebody gets injured in their truck driving to a work site, that's not a PHMSA reportable injury. But if they get injured as a result of the pipeline release, that is a PHMSA reportable injury. So you look at the injuries and fatalities across the industry, and even large operators wouldn't have a PHMSA reportable injury or fatality in a single year. So we look at the previous 12 months of information, and if you've had a PHMSA reportable injury or a PHMSA reportable fatality, you get an automatic deduction for that. So you add all these KPI scores up, and it can add a net sum of 1 to your implementation score. So if your effectiveness of implementation was a 4 and you have really good KPIs, then you could end up with an overall score of 5. On the other hand, if your KPIs are lagging, or if you get injuries or fatalities, then it's going to deduct from your overall implementation score. So that's how we're doing effectiveness of results. Now, the RP does require that you have leading indicators, and the effectiveness of your leading indicators, whether they're any good and whether they're showing progress, is evaluated in the implementation matrix, not in the effectiveness of result matrix. So we didn't ignore that, but we just evaluated under the implementation side, not the effectiveness of results side. Next slide. So the tool has been developed. We're currently testing it with a small group and getting feedback. We've been through a few cycles with this, so we feel like we're pretty close to the mark. But if you or your company is interested in testing this and applying it to your company and giving us feedback, we'd be glad to talk to you. So if you want to do that, you can contact the Pipeline SMS at api.org email, and they'll be back in touch with you. Once we've done our final kind of beta testing, if you will, we're going to roll it out broadly in its own webinar on June 21st. So that's my last slide, Aaron. I think we're to question and answers on that part.
Yeah, so just thought we'd take a minute, and if anybody has any questions regarding the roadmap, any of the other tools or the evaluation tool, we thought we'd take a minute to answer those.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, to ask a question, press star and then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for a brief moment to compile a Q&A roster. Once again, that is star and then the number 1 on your telephone keypad to ask a question.
So there's questions coming through on the chat, and I'll just say, I guess, coming through on the chat, I'm not sure. So Jill Delis says, would you give a specific example of one of the 50 big, broad questions and the sub-shall statements?
Sure, and I don't have the spreadsheet open in front of me at the moment, but I can give you a general idea how that works. So the big broad question, say you'd have a question about procedures, and the procedure question would ask the typical things that you would expect in procedures. Are they documented? Are they used appropriately? Do they cover all the types of operations they ought to cover? And those kinds of things. Now, so that would be one big broad question about procedures. But if you look at the shall statements, you'll see a shall statement that says, you shall have procedures for effective startup of your facilities, or you shall have effective procedures for shutdown of your facilities, or you get the idea. So those are very granular questions that all have to do with the big question of, do you have effective operating procedures? So that's kind of the connection between the big broad question, which rolls up some very specific individual comments that you find in the shall statements, into one generally more logical question that you'd probably ask during an audit.
So there's another question on the, through the chat. Is that, was the June webinar originally a workshop? And I can answer that one. Yes, the June webinar was originally scheduled to be a workshop in the original planning. Due to some of the timing with the development of the evaluation tool and the desire to test it, the webinar and the workshop that was originally scheduled for June was moved to October, and then we made June the webinar to go over the evaluation tool in detail, and then that would provide opportunities to have some input, share experiences using the tool during the October workshop. Okay, so there's another question on the chat, and it just says, I may have missed this distinction. Is the tool that is currently in the testing phase only to be used for evaluating the PSMS effectiveness, or can it be used to perform the initial gap analysis?
Yeah, so these tools have evolved over time. The planning tool, which was the first tool we released, used to be called the gap analysis tool. and that tool has 71 questions. So it's a little more granular than the 50 broad questions we have in the evaluation tool. But certainly there's a lot of similarity. The implementation tool, AKA the gap analysis tool, was structured in such a way that you could look at these questions and then identify what do you already have in place that addresses this, what are the things that you might do to address any gaps, and then you could prioritize them, you could assign them, you could schedule them. You know, so it was really, designed for develop my implementation plan and get everybody on board. So all 10 elements, and you've got groups assigned to everything that you want to do, and you've been able to prioritize things, high, low, medium. So this tool doesn't have any of that functionality built into it. It's just, okay, here's the question, these are the requirements of the RP, how well is it working, did it address everything it needed to address? So certainly if you wanted to be like Stephen Covey recommends and begin with the end in mind, if you're early in the process, you certainly could look at the evaluation tool and say, well, these are the questions I'm ultimately going to have to answer when you're filling out the implementation tool. But they were just developed, 2 years apart. So there's some inconsistencies in some of the questions. Hopefully, we're asking better questions now.
Okay, so just to follow up, would that suggest that using this newer? So would you suggest using this newer tool? And I guess that depends.
Yeah, it definitely depends. It wasn't really built to be used to develop your initial plan. Although certainly you could, all these tools are voluntary, and the planning tool was just provided as a way for people to get started and make it perhaps easier instead of just one big thing you have to implement. You can break it down into a whole bunch of small things you have to implement. You certainly, if you're so motivated, you could take the evaluation tool and turn it into an implementation tool and develop your plan like that from scratch. So that certainly would work. You might want to use the planning tool as a starting point no matter what, just to see how the tool is structured and has some good functionality built into it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the sake of time, I think we probably need to continue. Okay. So the next part of the webinar, I'll be talking about the voluntary third-party audit program that's currently being developed with API and in consultation with the implementation team. And as an introduction, I'd just like to talk a bit about API Global Industry Services very briefly. As stated earlier, my role with API and the implementation team is to work on the program initiatives. And I work within our API Global Industry Services group. And our goal is to collaborate with stakeholders and members to develop programs, auditing, training, personnel certification, company certification that help sustain quality and safety efforts based on the standards. So all of our programs, they use the industry standards that have been developed, and that, RP 1173 presented an opportunity for API to work with the implementation team to develop a program that would help to sustain all the ongoing efforts for the long term. So this is something that's in place and, considering sustaining and maintaining all these efforts over a long term. And one of these opportunities is this development of a third-party audit program to take the tools and leverage those tools and some other programs, again, to give this opportunity to sustain efforts. I'd like just to talk a bit about the development, and like most audit programs, the goal is to provide industry and stakeholders with a consistent, recognized process that makes use of the industry-developed tools and protocols. putting in this standard process using competent expert teams the goal is to ensure repeatable results that can be used for benchmarking and provide operators an opportunity to evaluate their systems objectively. As Bill indicated, the tools hopefully will yield data that then can be allowed for benchmarking, and our goal is to have a standardized process so that operators can see themselves in relative to everybody else in the industry. Again, a key to this is making sure we have competent, qualified safety management system auditors and teams that are trained and calibrated to these specific methods and protocols being developed, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Just some of the things, we leveraged some of our existing programs, and we have a long track record of success with these type of voluntary programs. Through our Center for Offshore Safety, audit service providers are accredited to perform offshore safety environmental management system audits to RP75 and regulatory requirements. This program's been relatively successful in helping upstream E&P operators with their implementation of their RP75 STEMS systems and their ability to meet regulatory requirements. The other program that was used mostly to benchmark for the ongoing development of the pipeline SMS audit program is our API Process Safety Site Assessment Program, which is also known as PSAP. This program, and once I just start talking through the specific development of the audit program for PSMS, you'll see that it aligns a lot with the PSAP program, as it uses a set of industry-developed process safety protocols based on relevant API standards and other PSMS standards and requirements to evaluate the implementation of a process safety management system at a refinery. And this program served as a key input to the development of the model for the work being developed for PSMS. The PSAP assessments are performed by a team of process safety experts that provide the refinery with a performance score in the areas identified in industry protocols, aligned similarly to what the evaluation tool would yield on the effectiveness and implementation side. And then reports are provided that summarize opportunities for improvement, identify strengths, and provide other important information relating to key factors that can drive performance improvements. The output from the assessments includes specific scores, again, as I referenced before, in the areas, and then can provide operators benchmarks to see how they perform relative to past performance and also relative to aggregate anonymous data from the industry. Again, API members, similar to the efforts here with PSMS, worked in collaboration with a trade partner, partner trade, AFPM, and then they use all the data and information to share experiences and look for trends to identify improvement opportunities. And as I indicated earlier, the PSAP model and its success with stakeholders have been a key input to the development of the PSMS program the voluntary audit program that I'll talk about here through the next few slides. Just to give a feel for schedule, the work development work continues with the program and the implementation team. And as the evaluation tool work winds down, we're working to plan pilots for later in the summer of 2018 with formal rollout, hopefully later in the year. And again, the program is going to use all the tools and inputs from the industry team, and it's going to be managed within API, leveraging our existing management and administrative processes and infrastructure that we use for the current voluntary programs we have in place. To get a little more into the specific PSMS voluntary audit program, it is important, some of the key things we considered is, one, it's important to highlight that the program, like all API programs, is voluntary. There are requirements in RP 1173 that the organization audit their SMS elements, and this program would provide operators with one option to meet the RP requirement. And as an organization moves through their SMS implementation journey from the conformance stage, like level 3 at implemented, into the effectiveness stages, level 4 sustaining and level 5 improving, it's hoped that the third-party audit program will provide value for evaluating and benchmarking through those three levels. Again, as it was described earlier, the audit program, if you look at the roadmap, is really designed for those companies that have implemented feel they've implemented conforming management systems and are looking for an objective way to evaluate their performance within that maturity continuum. We've been working in concert with the development of the tools, and it's important that the protocols and tools used within the program are consistent with those being developed by the PSMS implementation team. Again, the key tool that will be used for the audit process is the evaluation tool that Bill described earlier in the webinar. Key outputs from the audits are going to be these quantitative implementation data or scores that provide information relating to where the organization's implementations efforts are at relative to industry developed maturity model. Again, the audit's going to build some consistency in that so that we can evaluate industry progress as well as operators can look at their own process. And controls within the process are going to make sure that that data is secure and the aggregated data is anonymous. Again, participation in the program will be voluntary, and it will it will be up to each individual operator to determine if and when they participate in the program. So I'm just going to talk about a bit of, again, now about the details. The audit process that it's really been developed is in place, and it's based on, you know, current API audit programs and also just industry sort of benchmarks and best practices. You know, this diagram is designed to show sort of the inputs and outputs to that process and again how it will be done at a high level. The process requirements to be built around the management system requirements and auditing guidance provided in ISO 19011 and as well as the API audit programs. Key to that is working with the implementation team to get input to this process, and this even included running through what was called a pre-mortem risk assessment later last year to review possible pitfalls of the program and discuss mitigations that can be put in place to avoid those pitfalls. The industry protocols and team tools are also key inputs to this have been key inputs to the process. Of course, the key to this is all going to be having competent auditors and the competence of the people running this, doing the audits and providing the information. And we're working to develop competent lead auditors, establish those requirements and requirements for audit team members to form these pipeline audits. And I'll be discussing that later in this whole in the webinar. The pipeline SMS audit, again, like any audit, will consist of planning activities and audits of headquarters to evaluate the overall system and operations, to evaluate implementation if the system is actually being used. One of the key things that we've learned over the years is that audit planning is really key to running a successful audit. And this is going to be key to get consistent information sharing through a pre-audit visit, which really is a stage 1 audit to ensure that the scope and scale of the audit is determined, that we're finalizing any logistical items that need to be considered, and that needed resources, including interviewees, documents, records, etc., are identified and will be available as part of that audit process. We're looking at conducting the audit at the headquarters and the operating sites. This would be the auditors will collect the objective evidence through documents, records review, observation, and interviews. All information will be recorded in reports as well as the evaluation tool. Now, the way we're looking at it is the headquarters audit would be, you know, looking at overall system implementation and some of those general processes that cover the entire management system. But then that will be the audit will have to be taken out into the field to the operating sites to determine, hey, has this thing actually been implemented and is it being sustained, maintained at the different levels within the organization. You know, this is something where that's where the planning is so important to figure out, you know, the scope and scale of operations, where the audits are going to be conducted, what will be included, and those type of things. So that's where the planning up front and the sharing of information is so key to the success of all this. The audit reports, so we've built audit report templates based on, again, our previous programs, specifically that process safety site assessment program. And it's going to have an area to highlight key highlights, strengths, and notable practices, like what is being done well, and then also key observations that identify areas for improvement. The evaluation tool information will provide the data for the benchmarking. And again, the consistent use and application of that evaluation tool will give that operator an opportunity to compare results of that third-party audit even to their own audit, so they can test and validate their own audit process that they've come up with using the tools and say, hey, we're doing our own effective internal auditing, or wow, there's a real discrepancy here between what we're doing and what these third-party auditors are coming up with. You know, as the program grows, then we'll be collecting and aggregating this industry data to provide information for anonymous benchmarking of performance across industry. As with any program, that feedback on the process, the tools and reports, it's going to be key to improving the process, and we have systems in place to take care of that. And that'll include working with that implementation as we pilot the process and continue to develop it, and also once we execute, it's getting all that feedback in to as part of our own plan do check that cycle and making sure we're improving that program and it's meeting the needs of industry. Audit teams and auditors, very key to having a successful program. And again, the audit teams will be made up of lead auditors and, if required, as subject matter experts. We have process in place for determining qualified competent safety management system auditors, and we'll be looking for those that have experience with pipeline operations. Constructing these teams together and making sure that they address that we have all the competence requirements in those teams to effectively perform the audit and audit the SMS areas is key to the audit process and key to getting really good results that will add value and drive performance improvements. The audit team lead will be responsible for the pre-audit planning and directing the audit on site. The team lead will be responsible for seeing the big picture. That's a really important part of that audit team leader, is to be able to see the big picture and ensure that each element of the management system is considered when looking at overall performance of that system. The auditors will then be assigned the areas of the SMS based on their expertise in those areas, and each auditor will be responsible for collecting evidence and reporting that information. The overall management of the program will be performed by API staff and supported with current infrastructure. This includes establishing and maintaining that audit pool, training the auditors, contracting with the auditors and sites, selecting and scheduling teams, managing data and reporting, addressing operator feedback, and taking care of administrative activities such as billing, invoicing, etc. For the auditors, we are looking for experienced safety management system auditors that have worked with safety management system or related management standards and understand their application. Ideal candidates would have pipeline or similar process operations experience, and that could be, say, in process safety environment as an example. Lead auditors need to demonstrate that they are effective communicators and managers and have the knowledge and experience to see that big picture when it comes to implementing and improving safety management systems. We do have a well-established process for evaluating competence and qualifying auditors, and a real key to this will be the training that we're going to provide to our methods using those evaluation tools and RP 1173 and our procedures. Once an auditor passes the interviews, background checks, and other items that are really part of a regular hiring process, we will be providing that specific training. And it'll be really key to the effective execution of the program to make sure that we're calibrating all those auditors to use that evaluation tool to understand, how to, the expectations of the industry and the stakeholders on how to evaluate and how to provide that information as far as for the data part of it and scoring an operator along that maturity continuum. Part of the next steps in the development of the program, once the evaluation is set and ready, is to develop a training protocol and process to ensure the auditors that understand and apply the tools consistently. And that's all part of what I was discussing, the calibration and ensuring they're competent to use the tools. Again, once we pilot this, all this will be part of the lesson learned, and we're going to use that information once we go through the pilots to look at all what we're doing, the training, the auditors, and say, okay, is there something different we can do here before we launch it in later this year? So just to talk a little bit about progress, timelines, and plans for all this. Right now, working with the team to finalize the tools, working internally to look at the audit and reporting process and all the administrative side, and that includes the data stewardship. One of the things that's left once the evaluation tool is to say, okay, we're going to have this dual data coming in. We have current processes to model internally, but we want to make sure that those align with what the needs of the stakeholders and how that data is going to be used as output from the audit process. And that includes managing it to make sure it's secure, that it's anonymous when we're aggregating it, and those type of things. We're working to identify and establish a pool of auditors, and this includes reaching out to industry contacts and stakeholders to develop candidates that they would think would make good auditors. We also work with organizations to contract out as audit teams, and they provide individuals as well. In conjunction with that, we're going to work on development of this auditor training program with that, in conjunction with identifying and establishing the auditors. We also continue to work on that program administration that I mentioned, and that includes systems for inquiries where people are interested in inquiring about how to get this done, the contracting requirements with our assessors and the auditors and the auditees, and then the other administrative items related to billing, invoicing, and all these other things that are key to running an effective program. We're looking at hopefully doing pilots with a couple volunteer operators in the late summer 2018, and then launch later in 2018 once we've applied some lesson learned, again, in the spirit of Plan, Do, Check, Act, to look at, okay, well, we've done something, we've planned it, now what are we going to do to make it better? And then really the goal is to meet the needs of the operator industry and make sure we're adding value to this whole process. Just kind of in a wrap, the goal of this program, again, is to provide all operators, gas, liquids, with an opportunity to have an objective third-party audit that will give valuable data to drive safety improvements. Like the RP, it's flexible and scalable. It's not meant to be only for a small operator or a big operator. We're working within the confines to say, hey, through the planning process, through the tools, this can be used for any operator that's interested. Again, our real goal is to sustain the efforts of the implementation team and all the operators' efforts over the long haul. Once an operator is implemented, or they feel they've implemented a conforming system, it's a tool that the operator can use to ensure they continue to maintain that conformity. And the evaluations are a key part of that Plan, Do, Check, Act process. It's like fuel for that. The audit provides information to say, hey, I've got areas I can address, I can act, I can plan and do, and then that fuels that process. The audits, the evaluations are all part of that. And again, ultimately, it is hope the outputs from the audits will provide data for benchmarking and that can demonstrate real improvements are being made. And the industry is achieving the ultimate goal of improving safety performance through the implementation of Pipeline SMS. Also, another thing we're working on that may be of interest is with a group of industry SMEs to develop an e-learning overview on 1173, and this should be available in industry in the summer of 2018. So that concludes the audit part of it. I just wanted the review of the audit program and where we're at to date. What I want to just do a couple of reminders before we get into Q&A and a group discussion. The tools are available on pipeline-sms.org. And as Dave Merck mentioned in the initial opening comments, we are redesigning the website for an enhanced experience, make it easier to use, and that should launch here this week, and so be ready for that. Just to talk a little bit about upcoming SMS items and updates, you know, as part of this to support the one industry, one goal, the team continues to work on the other trades to ensure the activities are planned to support both the gas and liquids industries and implementation of the RP. As was indicated earlier, the webinar on the evaluation tool will be held June 21st, and that will be a deep dive on the evaluation tool, how to use it, the output from any testing that's been done. Again, as Dave mentioned, the annual report will be available next week as part of the API Pipeline and Cybernetics Conference. October, we'll be running the tools workshop, and the details will be in Galveston, and that'll be about using the tools and operator experiences using the tools. And we are looking for volunteers to pilot those tools, and you can contact pipelinesms@api.org to do that. So that concludes the information portion of the webinar. What we'd like to do now is have a question and answer, any group discussions. So I'll let that go.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, to ask a question, press star and then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If your question has been answered and you wish to remove yourself from the queue, you may press the pound key. We will pause for a brief moment to compile a Q&A roster. And again, that is star and then the number 1 on your telephone keypad to ask a question. And your first question comes from a participant whose information was unable to be gathered. Caller, if you've keyed up for a question, please state your first and last name. The line is open.
Kenny Passmore.
Hello, Mr. Passmore.
Yes, my question is, I'm showing October 2nd to be an information exchange in Houston. Is that the one you're referring to in Galveston as well?
Yeah, so that was, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Aaron, this is Dave Merck. I can talk to that. So, two different things. The meeting you're referring to is actually our pipeline information exchange. That is a broader industry exchange of safety-related incidents, near misses, and it's a sharing and learning opportunity that's broader pipeline safety. The SMS workshop is a week later, and that one's going to be on, I think it's scheduled for the 10th. So two different things.
Okay. Is that one actually on the portal? I may have missed it, but I didn't see it.
The pipeline information exchange or the SMS?
Yeah, the October 10th SMS.
Not sure if we have that one up on the portal, but we can definitely make sure that gets up there.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a question through the chat. Have there been any discussions about the length of time auditors would spend with an operator at headquarters and in the field, or what the audit duration would be based on? For example, number of employees, number of sites, other risk factors, etc. Yes, there has been discussions about the length of the time auditors would spend, but we haven't come to any precise formula yet. As far as making that determination, like any audit program, we do have, the duration would be based on the number of employees, the scope of operations, number of sites, and risk factors related to the operations. What we plan on doing is using the pilot to learn about some of that stuff, but also part of the pre-planning is scoping out that audit, and when we send that lead auditor to do that stage 1 visit, that would be where a lot of these discussions would happen in the determination of scope. How, is the length appropriate? It would be done. We also have guidelines that are prepared, through the accredited certification activities. There are guidelines provided, industry guidelines provided based on management system audits, based on size and risk factors that would be that can be referenced and that we have referenced in a lot of our other programs. So we are running tight on time, so are there any other questions?
I'm currently showing no questions over the phone at this time.
Okay. So just again, and Dave, did you want to say some closing remarks, or?
Just real quick. Again, thanks for participating today. Hopefully these are helpful. You know, if there's any feedback as to how we could improve some of these webinars and training that we're doing, we're always welcome for feedback. But you know, again, quick snapshot. We hope with the webinar in June and the workshop in October that it really gives everybody a greater opportunity to delve into the tools over the next few months in more detail, and hopefully get us more feedback and have some good, robust dialogue and discussion in person in October. So thank you again for actively participating. Continue to participate in these trainings.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.